Thanks for clicking enjoy the full story. It was Saturday, June 23, 2018. I'd been waiting for this day for years. My first trip to Disneyland. I had saved up for months, planned every detail, and now, at long last, I was standing in front of the iconic gates. The sun was high in the sky, and the warmth of the California summer made everything feel even more vibrant. My heart raced as I took in the view of Sleeping Beauty Castle, larger than life, shining with all its grandeur. I was finally here. Beside me was Mia, my best friend, who had been to Disneyland before. She'd been trying to get me to come for ages, and today was the day we'd finally made it happen. As we walked toward the entrance, I could feel the excitement in the air. People from all over the world were walking beside us, talking and laughing, sharing the same energy I had. There was something magical about this place that seemed to fill every corner. "You're going to love it," Mia said with a grin, nudging me playfully. "It's just as incredible as you think it is. Maybe even better." I could barely contain my excitement. I'd heard so much about Disneyland, the rides, the food, the energy of the crowds, but nothing could have prepared me for the feeling of actually being here, in the heart of it all. The smells of churros and popcorn filled the air, and the distant sounds of laughter and music drifted through the park. Everywhere I looked, there was something to catch my eye. Families taking pictures, performers putting on a show, and children running past, their faces painted with excitement. I was ready to dive into it all, to experience every inch of the park. We didn't waste any time. First stop, Space Mountain. Mia swore it was one of the best rides in the park, and I couldn't wait to see for myself if she was right. We made our way to the line, and that's when I noticed something odd. The atmosphere felt different. Not bad, just a little off. There was a subtle shift in the air that made me pause, but I brushed it aside. Maybe it was just the excitement of being in a new place, but something about the energy in the park felt a little heavier than usual. Still, it didn't stop me. I was in Disneyland after all. Nothing could ruin this moment. As we stood in line for Space Mountain, chatting with the couple in front of us, David and Emily, who were regulars at Disneyland, I saw a flicker of light above us. It was quick, barely noticeable, but enough to catch my attention. I glanced up and exchanged a look with Mia. "Did you see that?" I asked her. She nodded but seemed unbothered. "Probably nothing. Just a light glitch." I wasn't so sure. The flickering lights were strange, but I figured it was nothing. The energy of the park was still upbeat, and no one seemed too concerned. We continued talking with David and Emily, swapping stories about our favorite rides and the best times we'd had at the park. The line moved forward, and for a moment, I felt completely at ease. But then, the lights flickered again. This time, they didn't come back on. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People shifted uncomfortably, looking around. I looked at Mia, and her expression mirrored my own uncertainty. "Okay, that's definitely weird," I whispered. Before she could respond, the lights flickered once more, and this time, they stayed off completely. The entire area plunged into darkness. At first, there was only silence. A few seconds stretched into minutes, and the whole crowd was frozen, unsure of what was happening. The usual background hum of the park, music, announcements, the sounds of laughter, had vanished, replaced by a tense quiet. It felt like the magic of Disneyland had suddenly gone quiet, like a pause before something big. The cast members, usually so full of energy and smiles, began moving quickly. A young guy in a blue uniform stepped up to the crowd, talking into a radio, his face drawn with concern. A few other staff members hurried in different directions, their movements sharp and purposeful. David and Emily turned around, looking confused. "This isn't normal, right?" David muttered, his voice low. "Nope," Mia said, eyes scanning the area. "This is definitely not part of the show." Something felt wrong, but it wasn't panic yet, just confusion. People exchanged nervous glances as the cast members began speaking to each other in low tones. My stomach tightened as I watched the chaos begin to unfold. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe just a simple power outage. But I had the distinct feeling it wasn't just a glitch. Then, the whole area went pitch black. For a few moments, I just stood there, in complete silence, surrounded by a crowd of strangers. I could hear muffled voices, people whispering, the shuffle of feet as people shifted their weight, but nothing else. The usual energy, the buzz of a busy park, had disappeared. A voice crackled over a loudspeaker, though it was hard to hear over the hushed murmurs of the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We are experiencing technical difficulties. We ask that everyone move away from the ride lines and proceed to Main Street while we assess the situation. Thank you for your patience." I looked at Mia and she looked back at me, her brow furrowed in concern. "Should we go somewhere else?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before I could answer, one of the cast members approached us. "We need to clear the area," he said, his voice firm but polite. "Please head toward Main Street while we handle the situation." Mia grabbed my hand, and we made our way through the crowd, following the others toward the park's main thoroughfare. The sense of unease was growing stronger with each step, but no one seemed to be panicking, not yet, at least. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The excitement, the joy I'd felt just moments ago, was starting to slip away. Disneyland was still Disneyland, but something about this moment was changing everything. As we made our way through the crowd, the oppressive silence lingered. The usual hum of the park was gone, and the faint murmur of voices was all we could hear. People moved quickly but not hurriedly, as if no one really knew what was happening, but we were all waiting for something. A sign, a solution, anything to snap the eerie stillness. We reached Main Street, where a small crowd had already gathered. The cast members were stationed at strategic points, ushering guests away from the rides, directing them toward the center of the park. The energy here was different. It felt like a strange cross between anticipation and confusion, with people looking over their shoulders and scanning the darkened sky. Even though it was still daylight, the lights in the park were out, and the shadows seemed to grow longer. Mia and I found a spot near a food cart, where a couple was sitting with their children, talking quietly. The young girl was clutching a stuffed animal to her chest, looking anxiously around as her parents tried to reassure her. I felt the same unease bubbling in my chest, but I tried to shake it off. It was probably just a temporary glitch. This kind of thing happened in big parks, right? Power outages, mechanical issues. It wasn't unusual, I told myself. It was probably nothing to worry about. But then the announcement stopped coming. No more reassuring voices telling us to stay calm. No more updates. The quiet, broken only by the murmurs of the crowd, felt like it was closing in on us. A few minutes passed, maybe 10, maybe 15, and still, there was nothing. Just a growing sense of tension hanging in the air. I glanced over at Mia, who was watching a nearby cast member, trying to figure out what was happening. She caught my eye and shrugged, clearly just as confused as I was. I don't like this, she said quietly. This feels Yeah, I replied. But I'm sure it'll be fine. They'll fix it. We didn't move much after that. The group around us was getting bigger, the noise level rising slightly as people started talking more urgently, wondering what was going on. A few cast members came out to speak with the crowd, but their faces were grim, their voices clipped. They were talking in hushed tones to each other, exchanging hurried glances. No one came forward with any real information. After another 10 minutes or so, we heard a noise, a loud bang, coming from behind us, somewhere near Space Mountain. The crowd stiffened, and the hushed murmurs turned into nervous whispers. Is that? I began to ask, but Mia held up a hand. I don't know. But we need to stay alert. Then, out of nowhere, a loudspeaker crackled to life, startling the crowd. The voice that came through wasn't the usual cheerful tone we'd heard from cast members earlier. This one was deeper, almost shaky. Attention, guess. We have a situation. Please remain calm. We are experiencing an emergency. All attractions are temporarily closed. Please follow the instructions of the staff. We ask that everyone stay in the central areas until further notice. Thank you. The word emergency hung in the air, more unsettling than any of the preceding announcements. The way the voice trembled slightly made it feel real, like something had truly gone wrong. My heart thudded in my chest, and I noticed that the people around us were starting to look more nervous. Some were pulling out their phones, texting or calling someone. Others were simply standing there, frozen, as though waiting for the next shoe to drop. Mia grabbed my arm. Maybe we should head to the exits, just in case? Good idea, I agreed, my mind racing. Let's just make sure we stay close to people. We started to move toward the exit, following the crowd as they slowly filtered out of the main area. The park, which had once been full of excitement and joy, now felt like a maze, twisting and closing in on us. There was a sense of urgency in the air, but no clear direction. People didn't seem to know whether they should leave or stay, and the further we went, the more scattered everyone became. At the corner of Main Street, we saw a family of 4 standing near one of the shops, looking around as if they were waiting for something. The father looked just as confused as the rest of us, checking his watch and glancing at his phone. His daughter, no more than 6 or 7, was holding his hand tightly, her face pale. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. If they were this rattled, maybe we were all underestimating whatever was happening. My eyes darted to the staff again. They were moving in groups, speaking to each other more urgently now, their radios crackling with static. I wanted to ask someone what was going on, but no one had any answers. Instead, I kept my mouth shut, and we continued walking, trying to move with the crowd but not too far from the central area. The sense of discomfort was growing, the uncertainty eating away at the air. People were beginning to speak more openly, voicing their concerns about the lack of updates and the fact that the rides were still down. Some were making jokes to ease their nerves, but the laughter felt hollow, forced. Then, suddenly the crowd stopped. It was as though a wave of tension hit the people in front of us, and they froze, their faces filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. Mia and I followed their gaze, and our eyes landed on the large projection screen that usually played Disney ads. But this time it was static. And then the static stopped. A distorted image flashed onto the screen, too quick for anyone to make sense of it. For just a moment, I thought I saw something moving in the shadows, dark shapes, flickering in the black and white haze. But before I could process it, the screen cut to black. The crowd murmured uneasily. I heard someone in the back mutter, "What was that?" A few seconds passed. Then a different voice broke the silence, one I hadn't heard before, coming through the loudspeakers in a voice that was too calm. Too clinical. Attention. We've experienced a security breach. Please remain where you are. We will be guiding you to safety shortly. Stay with your party and follow the instructions given by staff members. This is not a drill. The strange message sent a chill down my spine. Security breach? The words echoed in my mind, heavy with meaning. What kind of security breach? Why hadn't anyone explained anything before? I didn't want to panic, but the feeling of dread was building, inch by inch. The crowd was shifting again, people beginning to talk more freely, but this time, the conversation was different. There was no excitement left, only confusion and concern. Everyone was on edge now. The questions were piling up in my mind. What was happening? Why hadn't we been told more? Mia turned to me, her face pale. This is bad, isn't it? I didn't answer right away. My mind was racing, and every inch of me wanted to believe that everything was fine, that this was all just some glitch, a temporary problem. But deep down, I knew that it wasn't that simple. The minutes that followed felt like hours. The crowd had grown more restless, murmurs turning into whispers, whispers into anxious conversations. The silence between the announcements was deafening, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder more often than I'd like to admit, waiting for some kind of resolution, or at least an explanation. Mia and I stood near the fountain at the center of Main Street, watching the staff members as they continued to confer in low voices. Some were directing guests to walk in certain directions, others simply stood motionless, as though waiting for something they weren't sure was coming. Then, a woman from the crowd broke the tension. She stepped forward, raising her voice to be heard over the murmur. "Does anyone know what's going on?" she demanded. "What happened? We've been stuck here for almost an hour, and they're not telling us anything." She wasn't the only one frustrated. Several others started voicing similar concerns, their words growing sharper and more urgent. People weren't just annoyed anymore, they were scared. Another announcement crackled through the speakers, the voice sounding even more strained now. "Guests, please remain in the central area. We are working with authorities to resolve the situation. Please cooperate with staff and avoid approaching any restricted areas. We will keep you informed as soon as we have more information. Thank you for your patience." The announcement didn't help. It felt like an empty reassurance. Cooperation? Authorities? Who exactly were they working with? Mia turned to me, her brow furrowed with worry. "This doesn't feel right. What do you think is going on?" I wasn't sure how to answer her. Everything felt so out of place, like the park we had known was slipping away, replaced by something more sinister that we couldn't quite put our fingers on. "I don't know," I admitted. "But we need to stick together, okay?" She nodded, her grip on my arm tightening. Just then, we noticed a large group of staff members moving in our direction, guiding people away from the center of the park. At the front of the group was a manager, his face grim and pale. He was scanning the crowd, his eyes flicking over everyone with a sense of urgency. As he passed us, I caught a glimpse of his expression, strained, like he was holding something back. Then, one of the cast members near us whispered to another. "We've been told to start evacuating. They're closing the park. No one's allowed to leave until they get the all clear." Evacuating? My heart skipped a beat. The word hit me harder than I expected. I had been hoping for a simple fix, maybe a power outage or a temporary mechanical glitch, but this was different. It felt serious. "Evacuating?" Mia echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. "But we're stuck here. We can't leave." The realization hit us both at once. The gates were locked. The ride lines, once bustling with eager guests, were now empty, and the exits were blocked by the same cast members who had been directing traffic earlier. It wasn't just a delay anymore. We were being kept inside. The park, once a playground of joy and carefree fun, now felt like a cage. A subtle but unmistakable shift in the atmosphere made it clear. We weren't supposed to be here. We were being told to stay, but we weren't being told why. I looked around at the faces of the other visitors. They all wore the same expressions, confused, nervous, unsure of what to do. Some had already pulled out their phones, dialing numbers or texting frantically. The lines at the food stands were long, and the air had grown thick with tension. It was as if we were all collectively holding our breath, waiting for the next moment to unfold. Mia seemed to sense my unease. She squeezed my arm tighter, her voice low. What if it's not just the power? What if something's really wrong?" Her words sent a cold shiver through me. I didn't want to entertain the thought, but the possibility was hanging there, heavy and unspoken. What if it wasn't just an outage? What if the park had been compromised in some way? What if they were keeping us here for our own safety? I shook my head. "Let's just stay calm for now. We'll figure it out." But deep down, I knew that nothing about this felt normal. And as we stood there, surrounded by the growing unease of everyone around us, I began to fear that whatever was happening inside those gates was something much bigger than any of us could have imagined. It wasn't long before we saw the first signs of panic. At first, it was subtle. A few people darting toward the exits, trying to force their way through the barricades, their eyes wide with desperation. A cast member shouted at them to stop, but it only fueled the anxiety. A ripple of unease passed through the crowd, spreading like wildfire. People began to move in groups, talking quickly, eyes darting toward the nearest exits. "Maybe they're evacuating us to another park," someone suggested, trying to sound optimistic, but his voice trembled. "That doesn't make sense," another replied, shaking their head. "We can't even leave this area. Something's wrong." The staff were doing their best to maintain control, but they were visibly overwhelmed. One of them, a young woman, was talking to a guest in a sharp, hurried tone, telling him to stay put, but her words lacked conviction. Another cast member was frantically checking his radio, looking agitated as he gestured to a group of security personnel standing nearby. I felt a lump rise in my throat. The staff, normally the calm center of the park, were starting to show signs of stress themselves. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand answers. But Mia's hand on my arm kept me grounded. "We need to find a place to stay put," she whispered. "Somewhere away from the panic." I nodded, my mind racing. We needed to find a safe spot, but even as I said the words, I realized there was no such thing as safe in this moment. Not anymore. The crowd's restlessness was palpable. It wasn't just the fear of the unknown anymore. It was a full-blown anxiety that rippled through everyone like a live wire. The sound of voices had dropped to a near murmur, but it was still loud enough to feel like it was pressing down on me, suffocating me with each passing second. People were growing more agitated, their patience thinning as the minutes ticked by. Mia and I had taken refuge behind a set of shops near the back of Main Street, trying to stay out of the way of the growing chaos. It felt like the right thing to do. Keep a low profile. Observe. Wait for clarity. But clarity was nowhere in sight. I couldn't stop glancing at my phone, trying to get some signal, any sign of what was going on outside these walls. But the network was overloaded, making it nearly impossible to get a clear connection. Messages were sent but never arrived. Calls went straight to voicemail. The sense of isolation was sinking in deeper. The park that had been buzzing with life just hours earlier now seemed like an eerie ghost town. People were gathered in little clusters, talking in hushed voices, exchanging theories, trying to make sense of the bizarre situation. But no one really knew anything for sure, and it felt like the uncertainty was weighing heavier on everyone. That woman, she looks scared, Mia whispered, her voice trembling slightly as she nodded toward a woman standing by a snack cart. The woman had a tight grip on her young child, her eyes darting back and forth between the staff and the other guests. Her face was pale, and her lips were pressed into a thin line of worry. I glanced at the woman and instantly recognized that look of fear, the kind you get when you're trying to hold it together, but you're not sure how much longer you can. I knew exactly how she felt. People were beginning to talk about the exits again, but now, there was an edge to their words. Not just talking about leaving, but the possibility that we might not be allowed to leave at all. The idea of being trapped in the park was starting to feel all too real. Suddenly, a loud voice cut through the air, coming from a man standing near one of the gates. His voice was shaking with frustration as he argued with the security guard. Why can't we leave? What's going on? The man's face was flushed with anger, his fists clenched at his sides. This is ridiculous. I have a flight to catch. I don't have time for this. The security guard was trying to keep calm, his hands raised in a placating gesture. I understand, sir. Please remain where you are. We'll be letting people out as soon as it's safe. Safe? The man scoffed. What do you mean by safe? This is insane. I'm not staying here any longer. The security guard's expression tightened, and he glanced back at his radio, clearly communicating with someone higher up. The tension between them escalated, but before it could spiral further, another staff member intervened, pulling the angry man away and leading him toward a seating area. But the damage had been done. The first sign of dissent had been thrown out there, and it didn't take long for others to start murmuring their concerns aloud. It was clear now, whatever was going on inside the park, whatever was happening with the power and the gates, it wasn't something temporary. People were beginning to realize that we were going to be here longer than anyone had expected. Mia tugged at my sleeve, pulling me back to the present. Hey, look at this, she said, pointing toward the center of the park. I turned and my stomach dropped. A large group of staff members had gathered near one of the central exits, speaking urgently to each other, their body language tense. A few people, security officers and park managers, were on their radios, speaking in rapid, hushed tones. And then I saw it. A black SUV had pulled up to the gates, and two men in dark suits were stepping out, flanked by a few more security officers. They moved quickly and with purpose, heading toward the staff at the gate, completely bypassing the guests. Something in the way they moved sent a chill through me. It wasn't just the fact that they were clearly in charge, it was the air of something more serious, something far beyond the ordinary. Who are they? I whispered. I don't know, Mia replied, her voice barely audible as she watched the men. But I don't like this. I couldn't take my eyes off them. The way they interacted with the staff, the authority they wielded, it all felt too calculated, too controlled. These weren't just people sent to deal with a simple issue. No, this was something else entirely. And I didn't think it was going to end with us just being let out of the park. We were all trapped. And it felt like no one knew why or what was coming next. The more I thought about it, the worse the situation seemed to get. The park had always been a place of escape, a place where families and friends came to have fun. But today, it felt like we were in a different world entirely, a world where everything had gone wrong. Mia squeezed my hand tightly, her nails digging into my skin. Do you think something bad happened? She asked quietly. I didn't want to say it, but I couldn't shake the growing sense of dread that was taking root in my chest. The security, the strange suits, the locked gates, all of it was pointing in a direction I didn't want to go. But I knew Mia needed to hear it, even if I wasn't ready to fully accept it myself. I don't know, but I think we're going to find out soon. The atmosphere was suffocating. Every second felt like a lifetime as we stood in that corner of the park, watching the events unfold. I had never seen the staff move with such urgency, and the presence of the men in suits, who were now conversing with park executives, felt like a slow build towards something inevitable, something I wasn't ready to face. The air was thick with tension, and people around me were starting to panic in hushed whispers. I just want to go home, Mia muttered, her voice strained. I could tell she was scared, and frankly, I didn't blame her. The park was no longer the magical place we'd all come to enjoy. It had become something far more unsettling. I could see others, like the woman with the child from earlier, growing more anxious. They were looking toward the exits, but it was clear they knew the same thing I did. We weren't getting out anytime soon. Look, I said, my voice low, I think we need to stay calm. Let's just wait for more information. They'll figure it out. But Mia didn't look convinced. She glanced toward the distant gates again, where the men in suits were still speaking to the security team. But what if they don't? What if this is something worse than we think? I didn't have an answer. The truth was, I didn't know what was going on, but the more I watched, the more the weight of the unknown pressed on me. Then, a sharp shout cut through the air. Everyone, please remain where you are. It was a voice amplified by a speaker, coming from one of the security officers near the entrance. The crowd grew silent for a moment as everyone turned toward him. We are currently handling a situation with the park's operations. We will have updates for you shortly. Please stay calm and avoid congregating near the gates. We ask for your patience and cooperation. The officer's words, meant to reassure, only seemed to heighten the growing fear. People began to murmur again, their voices growing louder, more frantic. Mia grabbed my wrist, pulling me away from the crowd. I don't trust this. I don't think we're supposed to be here anymore. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I knew she was right. Something was off, something wasn't adding up. But what could we do? We were trapped inside the park, with no clear way out and no answers from anyone in charge. But just as my thoughts started to spiral, something unexpected happened. A loud cracking sound rang out from somewhere deeper inside the park, followed by a series of muffled thuds, like distant explosions. My heart stopped. The crowd went from restless to absolutely frantic in seconds. People screamed, others dropped to the ground, ducking behind anything they could find for cover. The chaos was instant, the kind of panic I had only ever seen in movies, not real life. What the hell was that? Mia gasped, her face pale as she clung to me. My mind raced to make sense of it, but nothing added up. The world around me felt like it was crumbling. We need to get out, I said firmly, my voice shaking but resolute. Now. I grabbed Mia's hand and pulled her toward the nearest exit, where the security officers were scrambling to restore order. It wasn't an easy task. The park had gone into full-blown chaos in less than a minute. And then the unthinkable happened. A loud crack echoed again, but this time, it was closer, far too close. The ground shook beneath us, and I felt the air around me ripple with a force I couldn't explain. The building I had just passed moments before groaned, its structure seeming to bend, as if the entire park itself was reacting to the chaos. People screamed, scrambling in every direction as more cracks sounded around us. The distant whir of something mechanical started up, something large, something that didn't belong in a theme park. I could feel my heart pounding, and every instinct told me to run. We made our way toward the nearest emergency exit, weaving through the panicked crowd. Mia's grip on my hand tightened, but she kept pace, trusting me to get us out of there. The smell of burning rubber and dust filled the air, mixing with the scent of fear. I could hear the distant sound of sirens, but they didn't seem close enough. We were on our own in this moment. The gates that had once felt like an insurmountable barrier now appeared to be our only salvation. But as we reached them, we realized the unthinkable. They were locked. The guards at the gates were shouting at people to step back, to avoid the area, but I could see the panic in their eyes. They weren't prepared for this, for whatever was happening inside the park. But then, something caught my eye, a small, hidden side gate near the back of the parking lot. It was barely visible from the chaos at the front, but I could see a staff member standing nearby, beckoning us urgently. It was our chance. Without thinking twice, I grabbed Mia's hand and made a beeline for it, cutting through the chaos, dodging around panicked families and confused tourists. We reached the gate just as another loud bang echoed behind us. The staff member, a young man with a look of frantic urgency in his eyes, swung the gate open. "Go! Get out now!" he shouted, his voice strained. We didn't need to be told twice. I didn't even look back as we rushed through the gate, past the empty parking lot, and into the relative safety of the outside world. It wasn't until we were clear of the park's perimeter that I dared to breathe. Out of breath, I turned to Mia. "What the hell just happened?" I asked, my voice shaky. Mia didn't answer right away. Instead, she just stared back at the park, her face ashen. She shook her head slowly, as if trying to process everything. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely audible. "But I'm glad we got out. Whatever that was, it's not over." I knew she was right. Whatever had just happened inside that park wasn't just a freak accident. It was something bigger, something that was going to leave its mark on everyone who had been there. But for now, we were safe. And as we walked away from the chaos, I couldn't help but wonder how long it would take before the world would know what had really gone down inside those gates.